Welcome back to Auto Technic, and today we have some more F355 content coming for you. Now, during the production run of the 355, there was basically one major change, and that was on the motronic version. The early cars are ME2.7, later cars are an ME5.2. I just happen to have two 355s in the shop today, one of each version. Figured why not seize the opportunity, come out in the shop, make a video showing you guys the differences. Okay, before we get into the differences of the motronics, I just want to take a second and point out, I wouldn't say irony, but what are the odds that in my tiny little shop here with no space, I would have not one, but two F355s, and that each one happens to be Rossa Corsa, and on top of that, each one happens to be a GTS. The odds of that, in my opinion, are pretty rare. That's pretty unusual, but that's really where the similarities end. This car right here happens to be a 1994. The car back here is a 1999. So this is a late build and a very early build. This 94 also happens to be a European spec car, whereas the car back here is a full US spec car. And the big difference on top of the motronics from this later US car to the European car is the fact that this car is equipped with the F1 transmission. And obviously with this one being a very early car, that was never an option at that time, so it's a normal 3-pedal or standard car. So not only are we defying the odds with a very early 355 that's a European spec, a very late 355 that's a US spec, both Rossa Corsa, both GTSs. On top of that, each car is configured in a manner which I would consider quite unique. We'll start over here with the European car. Like I said, early 94 build, early European car. I believe this one came out of Germany. If we pop in here, because it's an early 94, this is a non-airbag car. So we have the non-airbag 3-spoke steering wheel, and there's no passenger airbag. That actually flips up, and there's a cubby in there. So that is one very different feature. These steering wheels are highly coveted, quite valuable and very hard to find. I think they really look great in the interior as opposed to the airbag steering wheels. I know a lot of people swap 360 steering wheels in here because that's a much more economical option, plus you retain an airbag, whereas this, there is no airbag. The other unusual spec on this car is the factory carbon fiber bucket seats. Now, I can tell you that I worked within a dealership for just about 10 years, and during that entire 10-year time, I saw one other 355 with carbon fiber bucket seats. That's how uncommon they are. Not a lot of people spec those, so it's pretty cool to see it. This is the second set that I've seen, and again, much like the steering wheel, I love these seats. I think they look great. I really like the way they look in the car, and I think it's very cool that it's such a rare option. Now, let's go to the US spec car, and this car is uniquely optioned as a very late production car. If we get down there and see, you can see that it has factory drilled rotors, which is pretty rare. This car is equipped with the factory Scuderia shields, which didn't come out as an option until '98. And again, not a lot of people chose those. However, if we come inside this car, it has our airbag steering wheel, so you can see the big difference. And it has the passenger airbag and no glove box over there. But the big one in this car is factory carbon fiber interior package. So the door panel inserts are carbon fiber. The rocker sills here, carbon fiber. Our center console, it's all carbon fiber. And you can see our binnacle, it is carbon fiber, although this is kind of a satin finish, not a full gloss for everything else, and that's for prevent reflection or glare. But much like the carbon fiber seats, this is the first time I've ever seen the carbon fiber interior package in person. So a very rare option. So what are the odds that I would have these two cars in the shop at the same time, both options so rarely with such unique options, with the same color and the same top style? It's wild. This will probably never happen again. So I just think it's pretty neat because with these cars, when they come in, they're always different. They're always spec different color interior, maybe different stitching, different options. And the fact that I have like polar opposites, but also similar with the rareness, I think is pretty cool. All right, I think we covered that enough. Let's talk about the motronics, which is what we came here to talk about in the first place. And we'll come over here to the 94 European spec car. And the big identifying factor on a Bosch ME2.7 car is the fact that you have two separate air intakes and airflow meters. So a 2.7 car is a symmetrical car, meaning you have two of everything. You'll notice I have a fuel filter up on top on each side of the engine, so we have two fuel filters. So on this car, I have two engine ECUs, two fuel filters, two fuel pumps, two airflow meters, two idle valves, two crank sensors, two sets of cam sensors. You're catching the trend. It's a symmetrical system. There's two of everything. The way to visualize it or think of it is two separate engines, independent of one another, that share a crankshaft. So our motronic ECUs are actually right here. I have our side trim panels off so I can show you, but this is the motronic ECU for bank 2. This is our motronic ECU for bank 1. This airflow meter, this fuel pump, everything for bank 1 feeds into this motronic ECU. It has its own cam sensor. I'll get you guys a light here actually. So you can see right there on the back of our intake cam, there's the cam sensor for the bank 1 ECU. We come over here for bank 2. There's our intake cam sensor for the bank 2 motronic. So there's two of everything on the engine, completely separate. Now, if you have one motronic that's down, it will start and run on one bank and be running on 4 cylinders. Or if you have one fuel pump that's out or anything. So when you're working on these cars and diagnosing them, you're basically diagnosing two engines at the same time. You have to make sure that both banks are working properly and synchronized with one another. Now, let's come over here to our 5.2 car, and you can see the glaring obvious difference where we have a singular airflow meter. Our air intake track Y's in and goes into our plenums. Our ECU on this car is up behind the passenger seat on the back of the firewall on the inside cabin of the car. So we only have one ECU on this car. That means we only have one crank sensor, one camshaft sensor, one airflow meter, one idle valve. When we're diagnosing the car, it's more like a conventional car that most of us are used to. We have one ECU that we're reading faults out of, one sets of parameters. Really, this is a much more conventional setup, which is actually a pretty unique setup for Ferrari because historically most of the cars always use two ECUs and are a symmetrical system like the 2.7 car. The 5.2 cars are really an outlier in that regard, but you can see that that's really the big difference. And if we drop you down, the light, it's harder to see, but we have our intake cam sensor on bank 1. We bring you over to bank 2. And since this is a later car, you can see right here, it actually has a vacuum pump and there's no cam sensor on bank 2. Now that vacuum pump doesn't have anything to do with the motronic version. That actually has to do with our ABS system because this car actually is a later car and it happens to use the Bosch ABS system versus our European car, which uses the Teves, but it has an older style ABS system. So this one uses a normal vacuum booster and brake master cylinder and ABS pump that is more similar with most road cars that we're all used to, where that system uses an accumulator and electric pump to provide your brake assist. No vacuum booster at all, very different system. So, one ECU inside the car versus the 2.7 with our two ECUs back here. Now, we all know 355s are notorious for engine out services, where you have to drop the engine out to get the timing belts replaced. Pretty easy on the 2.7 cars because the deal with our ECUs, we just unplug this connector, lay our wire harness in, and obviously disconnect everything else that we're going to be disconnecting, shift leakage, the rest of the electrical, our fuel system, our exhaust, and boom, the engine drops out the bottom. On a 5.2 car, that wire harness for the engine ECU runs on top of the gas tank, below the body, and it goes in a couple inches to a small hole that's probably 2 inches by 1.5 inches into the inside of the car, drops down and plugs into the ECU. So in order to drop the engine out of this car, I have to remove all the covers, I actually remove the ECU so I can get the connectors off. I have to push the rubber grommets through the firewall. Then as I'm raising the car off the engine, I have to keep feeding that wire harness through that hole. And that's because the wire harness is so stiff and there's such little space where it needs to feed into that hole that I can't pre-feed it in there and have it coiled up. I just kind of have to keep feeding it as the body comes up, slide that wire harness out. So it takes a little bit more time to get those out because the wire harness, 2.7 cars, don't have to worry about it. Now, there is a couple other differences that I think are just kind of consequential. So our intake plenums here, these have less mounting bolts. You can see there's just basically this one bolt here and one on either side. I can't remember the exact count of the bolts, but you can tell that one has the orange silicone coming out of it, meaning somebody has already went and resealed those two plenum halves because they commonly leak. If we come over here to our later car, you can see that it's much more robust where there's just 3 bolts right here on the end. So they added a lot of hardware to the two halves of the plenums to prevent all those unmetered air leaks, really just refining the process between the two cars. So our 2.7 car is essentially an OBD1 car. Our 5.2 car is an OBD2 car. So the big differences on that is they both have catalytic converters, but this does not have rear O2 sensors versus the 5.2, which does have rear O2 sensors. Meaning on the 2.7s, if you want to remove the catalytic converters and run test pipes, you can. You will not have a check engine light. The car will never know. Versus a 5.2, if you remove the catalytic converters, you're going to have a check engine light. The car will know. So you're going to have to find some way to solve that problem. Another thing that I should mention when we're talking about two ECUs, the 5.2 car actually has 2 check engine lights. A check engine light for cylinders 1 through 4, and a check engine light for cylinders 5 through 8, versus the 5.2 cars have 1 check engine light. It also has 2 slowdown lights respectively for each bank. So again, highlighting the fact that it is 2 separate systems, 2 ECUs. So when you read faults out of these cars, you need to read it out of each ECU. So with this being an OBD1 car, meaning it doesn't have to comply with the same emissions regulations that our OBD2 car has. Now, one of my favorite features on the 355s is the exhaust bypass. And on the 2.7 cars, I need my flashlight again. You can see the angle that that exhaust bypass comes off the headers, and it's a pretty steep Y. And it's almost like an exact Y. If I come over here, and it's a pretty steep angle where it peels off of that header. And also on our Y, there's no smaller catalytic converters in there. Again, because of emissions, they didn't need to. We come back to our 5.2 car. And you can see down here that the angle that our exhaust bypass comes off is much more in line, much more streamlined. And I can't show you now because everything's up underneath all this heat shielding. But there is actually smaller catalytic converters in that exhaust bypass to meet the regulations because, well, OBD2, you can't just be straight up bypassing the catalytic converters. To whereas the OBD1 cars, you could. Now let's start talking about our air intake because that's really where the big difference is on these cars. Back here on our 5.2 car, you can see that this is where the air comes in to our air box. This pipe right here runs up inside the body, and we'll have to come over here and open the door, and it actually comes up to right here. So if I run my hand in here, I can actually feel where it goes in and changes shape into a circle, and that's where it's getting all of its air for the air intake, which feeds through our opening right there in the door. So all of our air for our air intake is coming up and in, and it's a little divider where it's splitting from the bottom section is feeding into our radiator, and then the upper section, my hand right now is going up in it, and basically runs up over here, down the body, into our air box, into the singular airflow meter, into the engine. Let's come over here. The 2.7 car, you can see everything looks a bit different. It has a little resonator right there. It has our hose coming in for our air intake. And on these cars, it actually feeds right here off the back window. Now, I've not heard or seen anything published on why Ferrari made that change, but I will tell you that I do prefer my air intake right here because if you're driving the car and you have the driver's window down, when you crack open those throttles, all that air is coming in the engine, and I mean, these are ITB cars, right? You want to hear the sound that these things make. You have all of that sound right there feeding to your ear, which is right here, as opposed to the 5.2 car, which is much lower. Meaning you're going to get more intake sound. You know, it's tingling the senses a little bit better. You're getting a little bit more of that experience. And again, I don't know why in the world they changed it. I wish I could have both of these up on a lift with all the liners off and really study the differences and see if there's like a routing difference that they had to make a change for. I will say, like on a 430, that's another great car where it pulls air from the same area. And you can really hear it. And it's one of my favorite things, just to hear the engine back there breathing, coming to life. So that's one of the biggies. The exhaust bypass, I guess, because these have the catalytic converters in the exhaust bypass, it's going to be a little bit quieter when the exhaust bypass is open, which I also will note, when the exhaust bypass is open, the way the muffler is channeled, it is actually bypassing all of the chambers in the muffler, so the car is essentially straight piped. So on a 5.2 car, is this one here, you're going to be straight piped but still have small catalytic converters in your exhaust bypass Y pipe. Whereas with the 2.7, it's going to be more of a true straight pipe when that bypass is open. Now let's talk about the biggest talking point between these two cars. We have a single airflow meter on this car. Now, there's a lot of talk and a lot of people on the internet that say the 2.7 cars make more power than a 5.2 car, and it's because the engine's starved of air because of the single airflow meter. I have a story about that in a second, but that's all, you know, hearsay and rumor or seat of the pants feel on the internet. I think a lot of people have posted some dyno charts that does potentially support that. But I wanted to do some checks that are concrete, hard evidence. So I removed the airflow meter from this car and I measured the diameter. The diameter of this airflow meter where the air is traveling through is 3 3/8 of an inch. I did the same to our 2.7 car. Popped off an airflow meter. I measured the diameter across the airflow meter where air flows through. And just one airflow meter on the 2.7 car is 3 inches. I did some calculations on the surface area and volume. They get a difference of 2 3-inch airflow meters versus 1 3 3/8. The ME 2.7 car has a 58% larger surface area for the air to flow through those two airflow meters, meaning that supports everything that we've read on the internet. That is a significant difference to the single airflow meter on the 5.2. In my opinion, this car was developed and built and designed around the 2.7 motronic system. I think Ferrari was forced into the 5.2 in order to meet emissions mid-production, meaning this is, in my eyes, probably not the best word, but a compromise. It's not really, it wasn't what the car was intended for, and they had to use what was available to make it work, meaning they had to use what airflow meters Bosch had to make it work. They had to use what ECU Bosch had. And I don't think what Bosch had at the time was really equipped for this engine spinning at 8,500 RPM. I think the 2.7 is far more suited to that. And 58% decrease in airflow potential is big, especially on an engine that spins that high. Now, I have driven these cars back to back, but unfortunately this car has exhaust and this car is an F1 car. So I couldn't really tell you if I felt any difference seat of the pants wise, power wise between the two. I will tell you that the 2.7 car, or I would say all 2.7 cars, they're a lot more crude. So my take on that is they're not as refined. The idle's rougher, the transition's not as good. It's not bad, I would say it's more raw. Driving these cars, they basically just want to be driven hard. They don't really want to idle that well at lower RPM. I mean, they idle well, but it's not as smooth as a 5.2 car. These cars basically just feel angry and like they just want to go. They just want you to rip on them and row through the gears and have a great time. Where a 5.2 car seems like it'll just sit there and kind of purr at idle at a stoplight and it's happy doing so. It'll still rip really good when you're running at the red line, but it seems more civilized. And I account that to, obviously this car is going to run a little better. It's running leaner at idle. It has better emissions. There's more fidelity in the ECU. It has more control over the engine and, you know, fine tuning and adjusting it, which is the reason why they did it. So the experience of driving the two cars is very different. Think of this as more of the angry, pissed off, raw car that wants to just really row through the gears and more like, think track oriented, right? Where this car is maybe something a little bit more tame. You can cruise around, a little bit more civilized. That's a better word for it. So, interesting fact, all of the 355 Challenge cars retained the 2.7 system. So it does feel more motorsport derived and inspired than the 5.2 cars. All right, so back to that horsepower difference in between the 2.7 cars and the 5.2s. I promised you guys I had a story. So I was fortunate to be attending Ferrari factory training in Italy, and our instructor happened to be, let's say, a veteran of the brand or company, and he had been working for him for 25, 30 years, and he was a wealth of great stories and just anecdotes from back in the time. And he was around when these were out and brand new and being produced. And we actually had a discussion on the difference of the 2.7 cars versus the 5.2 cars. Now, he did tell us, yes, the 2.7 cars make more power than the 5.2 cars. I went and rechecked my notes because I wrote this down. This is kind of the stuff, whenever this stuff comes up, you write it down so you don't forget it, because you're probably never going to hear it or see it again. And I will tell you the number that he gave us on the horsepower difference was a 5% horsepower loss on the 5.2 cars as opposed to our 2.7 cars. Now, here's where the interesting part of this comes in. He stated that the homologation laws allow, I can't remember if it was like a 5 or 10% horsepower deviance from the advertised horsepower to the actual horsepower. So what he was trying to convey to us was Ferrari rated the 355 at 380 horsepower based on the amount of power that the F129 engine made with the ME2.7 system. Then Ferrari was forced into changing into the 5.2 system because of the loss of volume on that singular airflow meter, that the car dropped power. And again, the number he gave me was 5% power loss on these cars. Now here's the catch of the homologation rules. If the advertised horsepower has to be within that number, which was 5 or 10%, apparently the loss of horsepower on these cars was within that window. So when Ferrari built all the 5.2 cars, they knew they made less power. However, they never advertised it, spoke about it, publicized it. It was not really known until consumers got the car. And the way they got around that is where the car has to produce, say, if the number was 10% of the stated horsepower of the car originally, as long as it's within that window, they don't have to change all their data on the car and specs. So they're still within the window. And I can't remember what the numbers are. I will say that I tried to look up and find anything on the internet about the homologation and the laws of the horsepower percentage of what it requires, and I couldn't find anything. I wanted to see if I could find that really to put some truth to this. I do know that the individual that was telling us this information is a very trustworthy source. I know him quite well, and he's really never steered us wrong, so I do believe what he was saying. Unfortunately, all this information I got was just stories from an instructor. I have not seen anything publicized by Ferrari mentioning the difference of horsepower from the 5.2 to the 2.7. I would be surprised if they ever did publish it. That's what I know about the differences. I showed you guys the physical differences on the engines between the two. We do know that there is a radical difference of potential airflow through our 2 airflow meters versus our single airflow meter. We do have a little bit of a difference with our exhaust bypass, small difference. We have a bit of a difference with where the air inlet is coming in and the sound and feel that it gives you. And I will say between the two cars, there is a big difference. All those small things add up. So you get more ITB sound from the air inlets, you get more exhaust noise because you don't have the pre-catalytic converters in your exhaust bypass, and you have a raw engine management system versus the 5.2 cars. I would say they're more civilized, more refined. If you're looking for a car, which one do you get? In my opinion, I would prefer a 2.7. However, I would not purposely seek out a 2.7 car because for me, the configuration or spec would be more important. So if I wanted a car with the carbon seats and it was a 5.2, I wouldn't turn my nose at it. I would probably go for that. Or if I wanted like this car, it has the carbon fiber trim. It's super rare, hard to find. You know, if I had 2 cars that are identical, I'm looking at which one would I go for? I would go for the one with the carbon fiber trim. It's a much rarer, more desirable option. So if everything being equal, 2 identical cars, I would pick a 2.7. But overall from that, me personally, I look at color combination, if it's a Berlinetta or a GTS or a Spider, things like that would kind of weigh more into my decision, not just the engine ECU. Now, if I was somebody that wanted one that ran smoother, had a little bit nicer idle, ran a little bit leaner so it didn't smell so much like fuel at times, I would definitely go with a 5.2. And if I had a personality where I just wanted something that seemed like an angry, pissed off beast that I'm going to go hit the track with, then you might want to tailor your search to a 2.7 car. Either way, they're both 355s. 355s is one of my all-time favorite Ferraris. I absolutely love them. Hopefully one day I'll own one, and you can't go wrong with either one. So, thanks for hanging out. Listen to me ramble on about the differences of the two cars. I hope it was worth your time. Like I mentioned, I don't know if I'll ever have a 2.7 and a 5.2 car in here at the same time, let alone virtually twins. Between these two cars, if I had to pick, I've been thinking about that, and I don't know if I could. I really don't. I love the steering wheel. I love the seats. I love the 3 pedals. I love the 2.7. I love the carbon fiber interior trim. It almost seems sacrilege to consider taking the carbon fiber trim out of one and putting it in the other. I wouldn't want to do that. But yet, this one still has the Scuderia shields and the brakes. So that would be really hard between these two cars to choose. So that's what I was saying. I look at these cars as, yep, there's the difference in engine management, but the options and configuration, that really weighs pretty heavily in my decision, if not more heavily than the engine management of either car. So I think we're going to leave it there, guys. Thanks for watching the video. I really appreciate it. You know the drill. Be sure to share, like, and subscribe. Jump in the comments. Let me know if you guys own a 355. Let me know if you have a 2.7 or a 5.2 car. If you've had both or have both, let me know which one you prefer and why. I want to hear what you have to say. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.